Hello, Brighton. How's everybody doing? Thank you for joining us today. I've really enjoyed this conference, really enjoyed getting to know some of you, and the food and the drinks and the fun. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for being here. I'm excited to talk about Escrow Buddy. This is a tool for escrowing missing FileVault recovery keys in your MDM. The links I mentioned and the slides themselves and everything that I'm talking about today are all available from the URL that's at the top of the screen now. I'll display this for a minute or so along with the QR code, and then again at the end. So don't feel like you have to scramble to write anything down. It's all in that link. So you'll get that again at the end if you miss it. So who am I? I'm Elliot Jordan. Hello. For years, I've helped create and maintain Mac admin tools like Recipe Robot and Autopackager and DocLib and many others. I was an IT consultant for 10 years before becoming a client platform engineer for large companies with Mac fleets. So now I'm a senior client systems engineer at Netflix. And before we get started, because Escrow Buddy relies on a technology called FileVault, let's review the basics. I know all of you all know the basics of FileVault, but my mom doesn't, and she's here today. So for her benefit, let's talk about FileVault for a second. FileVault is Apple's way of encrypting your computer's whole disk so that only authorized people can access its data. Organizations use FileVault to ensure that data remains protected even if a Mac is lost or stolen. And users' passwords can unlock FileVault, as well as a personal recovery key, or PRK, can also unlock the FileVault, and that's useful in case the user forgets their password. Institutional recovery keys used to be a thing. They're no longer recommended, so we're not going to mention that. And personal recovery keys can also be escrowed or stored in MDM, mobile device management, for the benefit of companies to have a safe place to store that information in case the user forgets their password. They can call the help desk, and they can look up what that PRK is, get them back onto their Mac. So that's FileVault in a nutshell. With those basics established, I'm going to show you what you came here to see, which is a 30-second demo of Escrow Buddy in action. Let's see it actually work. So first, let me set the scene. At the right, we've got a Mac that was encrypted prior to enrollment in our MDM. So it is FileVault encrypted, but we don't have the personal recovery key. It's stored in the previous MDM, or maybe it wasn't enrolled at all, so we don't have it. We have already deployed, we've used our new MDM to deploy Escrow Buddy and configure it to this Mac. So all we need to do is log in, and it will generate a new key for us. Meanwhile, at the top, we're streaming the Escrow Buddy logs from that computer, and you'll be able to see what's happening in real time. And we're doing that over SSH on the local connection. On the bottom, I've set up a looping API query to constantly ping our MDM and see what our MDM knows about our FileVault key status. In this case, it's Jamf, but a lot of MDMs have similar APIs you can use for this. So let's start things off by logging out of the computer. Once our FileVault authorized user logs in again, a new FileVault key is generated, and you'll be able to see that in the logs at the left. There you go. The Mac then performs a recon in Jamf's case, but any MDM, it could allow the security info response to be sent over the MDM command, and that is what triggers the key to be sent back to your MDM. And once it does, as you can see here, the key is now stored and being returned from the API and is marked as valid. And that's all there is to it. The user wasn't given any extra password prompts. It was the standard macOS user experience that they know and trust. So now let's back up and share some context for why this is needed in the first place. FileVault keys can be missing from your MDM for a number of reasons. One example is migration from another MDM. Maybe you have all the keys in your previous MDM, but maybe certain MDMs don't have a way to export those keys or import those keys, so you have to regenerate them, and that's one way to do that. Another issue is that sometimes, as I showed in the example here, the computer could be encrypted in FileVault before it's enrolled in your MDM. So the MDM has no knowledge of what that personal recovery key is. The other is that the escrow profile that delivers the information about where that key should be escrowed to might have been misconfigured or misscoped, or something went wrong with the delivery of that profile to the Macs. Or there could be data loss, corruption, heaven forbid, maybe some database went bad on your MDM and you lost all of the recovery keys for your Mac fleet. So in any of those cases, what are you supposed to do to fix that? One option is to turn FileVault off and then on again. This will generate a new FileVault key, but of course there's some risk because the Mac will be unencrypted for a short time there. And that would be hard to automate at large scale. You don't want your Macs to be out of pocket for too long if you can't manage that process. The other option is to manually run the FD setup binary. You can do FD setup change recovery -personal, and any FileVault authorized user can run that command to issue a new recovery key. But a lot of people aren't familiar with terminal. They're not comfortable entering commands. Certainly, making them put in sudo and escalate their privileges to run that is not a scalable solution. Fortunately, FD setup can take a plist with credentials as input. So if you can somehow get those credentials, then you can provide that to FD setup behind the scenes and allow that process to happen. And those credentials either need to be the username and password of a FileVault authorized user or a current valid personal recovery key. Obviously, we don't have that, so it's the password, the user's password, that we have to grab. The old way to do this, please stop doing this, is still being done by some organizations and even some MDMs, is to prompt the user for their password. This requires a lot of work to do well. It involves making the user aware that there's a prompt coming, sending some context so that they're not surprised by this, prompting them for the password and then storing that securely somehow, and then triggering FD setup binary to happen behind the scenes with that plist input, as I mentioned, and then communicating the result of that action to the user to let them know that either it worked or it didn't work. They're going to have to contact the help desk and get some extra guidance. This is really hard to do well. It requires sending emails, maybe Slack messages, newsletter campaigns, getting that information out about what this process looks like, that it is in fact trusted from your IT. It's a pain in the butt. And unfortunately, this method also conditions users to be more accepting of credential prompts in general, which is a primary vector that malware uses to get a foothold on systems. So when you do this, you're not building a healthy security culture, so don't. I do have a confession, though. I'm partially responsible for popularizing the old password prompt method. I presented that method in 2015, posted my script and Git flow to GitHub, and been maintaining it in a working state for years. I had good intentions, but back then I didn't know there was a better way. And now I'm kind of shouting from the rooftops to get everybody to switch. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me. So the new way is to use an authorization plugin. What is this? This is a plugin that's used by the macOS login window to make decisions and provide automation around the login process. A huge benefit of authorization plugins is that they can securely access credentials being used to log in, and they can piggyback on that process and use those credentials elsewhere securely. A common example of this is federation to an IDP, for example, like Jamf Connect allows. An authorization plugin is also ideal for automating FD setup since it can leverage the trusted macOS interface to do it, obviating the need for any additional prompts that the users won't be familiar with. And as I mentioned, hurting the security culture of your company by doing that. So no time-consuming communication or support tickets from suspicious users. From the user's perspective, there's no difference in their login process. But the authorization plugin executes during that time and does some extra tasks that you tell it to do. So I've created a diagram here of the systems and components used by Escrow Buddy to kind of illustrate what is part of macOS, what is part of Escrow Buddy, and then what is part of your deployment of Escrow Buddy and the customization that you do. So the items in blue are the trusted macOS built-in components. So it's using the first-party login window, the authorization database, and the security server built into macOS to make this happen using Apple tools like the FD setup binary and other frameworks. The green item is what Escrow Buddy includes. That's the authorization database configuration script that runs as part of the installer, and the security agent plugin itself, which contains the authorization mechanism that does the work. And then the items in orange are the items that you'll additionally have to deploy along with Escrow Buddy. And that's basically just creating a plist file that contains a preference setting that Escrow Buddy will use to determine, does work need to actually be done on this Mac? And Escrow Buddy won't take any action unless that key is flipped to true. So that gives you some additional flexibility to install Escrow Buddy, but not actually have it run at the next login if the key is actually just fine on your MDM. So if this whole authorization plugin idea was so great, how come somebody hadn't already thought of it? Well, it turns out they had. Crypt, back in 2017, I believe, introduced this exact feature as part of their tool. Crypt is an authorization plugin that's often paired with a Crypt server in order to escrow FileVault keys to in-house hosted servers instead of to MDM. But it's kind of a little-known feature that Crypt also could be deployed standalone with no Crypt server and generate new keys upon login, just like Escrow Buddy. However, Crypt is primarily targeted at and built by administrators who are running a Crypt server. That's really the target audience. And it included payload and documentation and code base is all written by and for those who don't escrow to MDM specifically. So we realized there was a potential gap to be filled there for people who want that capability, but only escrow to MDM and don't want to have the additional confusion and complexity of Crypt server being mentioned over and over again in documentation. Crypt, by the way, is an excellent product, and if you want to kind of graduate from escrowing to MDM, there are some great additional features, some access controls, automatic rotation, things like that Crypt supports that default MDM sometimes doesn't, so you might look into that. But we decided we want to laser focus on that login capability using the authorization plugin. So Escrow Buddy is what we came up with at Netflix, and this is a new authorization plugin as of last year. It's a stripped-down alternative to the Crypt agent that's laser focused on people who escrow to MDMs and want to generate new PRKs for that escrow at next login. So Escrow Buddy does two things, really. It just checks for the presence of a proper FileVault escrow payload, make sure that you have escrow configured on that computer via MDM. And then it generates a new FileVault key upon login and at no other time. And that's it. So relatively simple. And that simplicity makes it easy to deploy. It makes it universal and work with basically any MDM and work for basically any company. So there's nothing in our code that's Netflix specific or any other company specific. It should work for all MDMs in the Apple ecosystem, assuming the MDM can deploy packages and meet some other requirements. But it's been a huge success for us. So here's just a snapshot from last year. When we started this project, about half of our Mac fleet had invalid or missing personal recovery keys, mostly because they were encrypted prior to enrollment in our MDM. We started testing Escrow Buddy in about March, April of last year, and then deployed broadly to Macs in May. And it helped us go from about 50% to almost 95% key validity in just a few months. And this is with no prompts, no communication to users, no additional context setting or anything like that, just letting people log in the next time they logged in. And we went from 50 to 95. And as of a few days ago, we're up to 98.4% key validity on our Mac fleet, the ones that are encrypted by FileVault. So yeah, this is a huge success story for us. So what do you need to do at your organization to have these similar results? So maybe you're starting from 90% already and you just need a bump to get to 100. Or maybe you literally have no PRKs escrowed and you want to start from scratch. Maybe you're migrating MDMs and you want to get all the keys to come with you without a bunch of messing around. So deploying from your MDM, it should be pretty easy for almost all MDMs that support installer packages. As long as you can deliver a package, then you should be able to configure Escrow Buddy. And there's community contributed setup instructions for a lot of MDMs already, including the list you see here. If you have an MDM that's not on that list, I really would love to have you consider building a page for that. If you decide to deploy Escrow Buddy yourself and you write down the steps that you followed to do it, please feel free to add to the wiki as others have done. And we'd love to get all the MDMs represented there that should be. And again, the links here will be in the QR code at the end as well. So let's take a look at one example, which is basic Escrow Buddy deployment with Jamf. There is a wiki page for this, as well as a guide from HCS in PDF format. It's a really great step-by-step process that they wrote up for how to do this for Jamf administrators. The first step is to download the latest Escrow Buddy package from GitHub, and then upload that to Jamf, and then create a smart group that collects all the Macs that should be in scope for that re-escrow. So it would probably have criteria like personal recovery key, individual recovery key status is missing or is invalid, something like that. And then create a policy that installs Escrow Buddy on those devices and then runs a defaults command. You can include that in the policy as a one-liner, or you can do that separately in a script, whichever you prefer. And that defaults command tells Escrow Buddy, at next login, go ahead and regenerate a key for this Mac. So you do need that in addition to installing Escrow Buddy to tell it to do the work. And that's it. When the user next logs in, a key will be generated. And then at the next recon, in Jamf's case, then that new key will be communicated up to the Jamf server in response to the query security info MDM command. So there are some ways to go beyond the basics if you're interested. Some organizations might benefit from some things like separate policies for installation versus configuration. I personally prefer this because it reduces the setup time on Macs if they already have Escrow Buddy installed and they just need a key regenerated. There's no reason we have to reinstall the tool again. We can just flip the defaults command back from false to true, and then Escrow Buddy will generate it again at next login. Some people like to bundle those together and have the same policy do the install plus the config. That's fine, whichever you prefer. Recidivism detection. There's my Scrabble word for the day. This is detecting Macs that are going from invalid keys to valid and then back to invalid again for some reason. You can kind of create an extension attribute to figure out when was the last time the key was regenerated, and if a Mac flips that date back to the present more than once, then there's probably an issue there that warrants some investigation. Automatic key rotation. This is a feature of Crypt that you don't have to build yourself if you're using Crypt. But if you're using Escrow Buddy, you can use, for Jamf, for example, you can use a combination of extension attributes and smart groups to figure out the date and time that the key was last rotated. And if it goes past a certain number of days or months or weeks or whatever you want, then you can rotate it again automatically. So that might be useful for some organizations. I don't do that myself. Sorry, I don't do that myself because I'm too concerned about, what about that gap when the key is rotated, but before it's before the next recon runs. But I'll have a solution for that in a second. I'll show you. And then finally, notification of users. The whole idea of Escrow Buddy is kind of to prevent prompting them from their password, but that doesn't necessarily prevent you from prompting them for other things. For example, urging them to log out. Ideally, you have some other reason for them to log out. Software updates are probably the main #1 reason, but if you do need the key regenerated quickly and the user's logout is the only thing stopping you, then yeah, it's possible to throw up a notification or a dialog box or something like that to encourage the user to log out sooner than they would otherwise. So I mentioned how to escrow the key quickly, as quickly as possible after the key is generated. You probably noticed in my demo earlier that the key was escrowed within about 20 seconds of login. That was pretty quick. That wasn't coincidental, and it's not usual for our configuration. We've got inventory running every 24 hours by default. So it doesn't automatically happen at login. So this is the trick that I used to make it happen at login, or not at login, but at key escrow. What this is, it's a daemon that's watching a specific path where that FileVault recovery key is going to land on disk. It's an encrypted CMS envelope that it's put in a particular location on disk. And if the daemon watches that path and sees a change, it will trigger a Jamf recon to happen immediately. And you can substitute Jamf recon for whatever other MDM command your MDM uses to trigger that security info response to happen. But that should, in theory, make that key escrow as quick as it can be possible after it's generated. There are some risks with this. The watch paths mechanism for launch daemon has a warning in the manuals page that you might want to read just to make sure it's not applicable to you. There's a way to throttle if there's some kind of problem with that path that it keeps getting modified. You don't want to have endless MDM check-ins occur. So do test this out, make sure it works for you before you deploy it. But it's something that I found that helped me. And I wrote up a post about it that will be linked at the end as well. And then here's some miscellaneous tips and troubleshooting, just a grab bag of odds and ends that I thought you might be interested in. One is reading logs. There is an FAQ page on the wiki with the command. You can use the log show or log stream command to see what Escrow Buddy is doing. As you saw in the demo at the beginning, there's some useful information in there. Unfortunately, it's not just a file on disk. It's in the unified log, so you do have to use the log command or some kind of a unified aggregator to get that information. I find just having the user, assuming they can log in, run the log show command during a specific period will give us the information we need. If they're not able to log in and there's a serious problem that we're troubleshooting, then having to connect over SSH is an option. Or you can use recovery mode to disable the authorization plugin and then log in and use log show to see what happened. Speaking of which, you definitely want to test any authorization plugin, whether it's Jamf Connect or Xcreds or Nomad or anything that you're using to modify your login window. Make sure that you're in the Apple seed for IT program. Make sure that you're testing new versions of macOS as they come out, because the authorization database does change, and sometimes updates do reset that in order to make a change to the database that's needed by Apple. And any third-party items that are in there could potentially get reset. And worst case scenario, one of those third-party items might not be compatible with some new version that comes out and might prevent your users from logging in. I haven't found that to be the case, and we're kind of designed to fail open for that reason. If there's some problem with escrowing the key, it should allow the login to continue, assuming macOS has already verified that the user is authorized. But it's always possible, some bug could occur. So definitely test new versions of macOS to make sure that they're working for the fleet. Tracking success over time. So that bar graph that I showed you earlier, we used some advanced searches on Jamf, and then we used the API to collect the member counts of each search over time. And that was how we collected that information and then binned it into the weeks that I showed you in the bar graph. Your management, I'm sure, if you're deploying Escrow Buddy, would love to see similar success metrics, and you can really build a case for a successful deployment using visualizations like that. So there's some tips on the wiki for how to do that. And then managing authorization database entries in general. There's some good tips on the wiki for how to do that. There's a specific order that the keys, that the items, the mechanisms in there have to be in. And then there's ways to manipulate that if you need. If you have more than one authorization plugin, you want to make sure to test what order they're in, and you can use the scripts to modify that if needed. Some of you, I know from already talking to you, that you actually have already successfully deployed Escrow Buddy, and I'm super happy to hear about that. We are trying to gather some real data on the project's impact out in the world. So we put together just a 2 or 3 minute survey about how many computers you've deployed it to. Of that, how many have actually regenerated a new key successfully, what your overall satisfaction is, et cetera. It just takes a minute to answer, but it's really valuable for us because it helps us prioritize future engineering work and projects like this. So if you've already deployed Escrow Buddy or if you're planning to soon, definitely please submit this the survey. It helps us out. And then just a note on where Escrow Buddy is hosted. Netflix is super proud to have partnered with the MacAdmins open source organization on GitHub to host the source code for Escrow Buddy. This puts Escrow Buddy alongside other important community tools like Nudge and the MacAdmins Python package and the excellent new SOFA tool that many of you have heard about. So we've configured automation that ensures that new releases of Escrow Buddy are automatically signed and notarized by the MacAdmins open source signing certificate when the new releases are available. And hosting in that GitHub organization ensures that community contribution and maintenance is as easy as possible for as long as possible. So if anybody in the world could submit a pull request and it can get reviewed by a number of people, not just me. So yeah, we're very happy to have partnered with MacAdmins open source. Pictured here is a panel discussion from the last PSU MacAdmins conference that's available on YouTube, where Nate and Greg and Rich and Chris and I talked about the MacAdmins open source organization and kind of solicited community involvement in that group. So definitely check that out if you've got some time. And then finally, some takeaways. I definitely would encourage you, if you're not currently escrowing your keys in MDM, definitely start doing that. It's a really easy, low-hanging thing to do to help your users. And if you are, check how many of those Macs have valid keys and check how many maybe aren't valid or are missing. And see whether Escrow Buddy is a solution that could help you with that. And especially if you're using any kind of password prompt workflow for regenerating those keys, I encourage you to check out Escrow Buddy and see if you can drop that in place of that workflow, because it's going to be a much more trusted experience for your users. It's going to be much easier for your department, IT and security departments, to sign off on and deploy, and just a general better security culture in your workplace. So yeah, thank you. I'm happy to take some questions now, and thanks to everybody, thanks to the organizers, and everybody else. I'll be around after too if I don't have time to answer your question here. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot. Perfectly timed. Have we got any questions? Why is it always the other side of the hall?
It's great lighting in here. I like the color.
Hi. You mentioned that you use your smart group with the invalid key or missing keys as a target to the package. And of course, when you log in, the application is going to send information, and then the scope from the deployment. Are you doing any kind of cleaning up or stopping the continuous script? Because every time you log in, you would have a new key issue, right?
Yes.
Are you just removing the configuration from scoping and leave the app alone? Or you do a full cleanup of, okay, I've got the key, delete the app, delete the configuration profile. What would be your advice on that kind of post-new key?
Right. Yeah. The question, is there any kind of cleanup, or how do we handle getting rid of the key after it's been escrowed, et cetera? So Escrow Buddy doesn't like self-uninstall or anything like that. It does stay installed. You can create dynamic grouping and policies such that after the key has been made valid again, you can remove the tool. And then that next login, it just goes back to regular login with no Escrow Buddy. But you don't have to, because that property list, that plist thing that you're deploying with the defaults command, there's a reason for that. And there's a reason we can't deploy that with MDM. We have to use a defaults command to do it. And that's because after the generate new key Boolean being set to true and a login occurs, Escrow Buddy will set that back to false to prevent generation over and over again every single login. So as long as that gets flipped back to false, then there should be no looping there. But at any point, you can redeploy the policy, set it back to true, and then just one more time, it will regenerate the key. Yeah, hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Probably got time for one quick one if anybody has a...
Is there any mechanism in Escrow Buddy to detect if a recovery key has been used? And if so, to rotate it?
No, that is a feature of Crypt. So again, check out the Crypt project and the Crypt server project. They've got great access gating. When somebody logs in and views the key, you have the option of automatically rotating that key the next time it can be the computer checks in. So, but no, Escrow Buddy doesn't. It's kind of out of scope. We're just focusing on regenerating that key at login, and what happens to it after that, we don't know or care about, and that's intentional because we don't want to have to encrypt things and communicate with servers, and we're just using the Apple tools and triggering those tools to do their jobs. So anything that would trigger a key to be regenerated on viewing would have to happen from the MDM. And if you've got an API in the MDM that can do that with a webhook or something, and then can put that Mac back in policy for regeneration, then that's exactly what I would do.
Great.
Cool.
Thanks very much, Elliot.
Thanks, everybody.